Donato, thank you so much for being here with us and giving us an opportunity to listen to you.
Thank you for having me, Nicole. I manifested a little too hard and I'm finally here. Hey, y'all.
No, this is huge. I have loved you since the moment I laid eyes on you. I just one of those people where, like recognizes light in terms of energy and spirit. And you just come into a room and you glide into a room. First of all, you glide into a room and you're such a fun, delightful person. I'm grateful that you would even sit here with us and share so openly and completely, and vulnerably, because that's how you do it.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
All right. Let's just dive in because everyone wants to know, right?
Yes.
First things first, if there was one unfiltered truth about your lived experience that if you could just zap it into everyone's brain right now in the world, what would it be?
There's many, but I want to start here and we'll unpack the rest as we go through this conversation. Mm-hmm. But I want to encourage people to know and understand that trans people have been around for time and memoriam, right? And we might exist in various different cultures beyond our Western understanding of transness.
Okay, so tell me more about that.
So I'm someone from the Pacific Islands, the Pacifica region. I'm Fa'afafine and Leyte. And these two gender identities, one from my Samoan side and one from my Tongan side, and various different identities from the Pacific, have been cultural keepers, healers, and practitioners within our communities and have been revered.
Wait,
right?
so okay, and I want to break this down because I think what you're saying right here is so key. For a lot of people, and I don't believe the devil needs advocates, but I do want to speak from the standpoint of someone who may not be as immersed into it, right? Who may not understand the culture. Essentially, you're saying for some, they feel like trans is new, right? I hear this all the time where people are like, all these kids with all this trans stuff or, all this pride stuff feels like it's new and being pushed, or everyone wants us to suddenly accept stuff. There is increased visibility, right, around what you're saying is a identity that's always existed.
Correct.
Okay, so tell me more about, at least from the cultural standpoint of, you're saying in Samoa and Tonga, which it represents a sort of Pacifica, right? I'm gonna nail this pronunciation,
Pacifica,
right? Pacifica.
Hey.
Watch, I'm gonna be the one who's like, Pacifica? Like, I'm gonna see people down the street, girl, you Samoan Pacifica? That's gonna be me in a minute. But all that said, around that identity, that this is something that, when you say goes back, what do you mean? Like 100 years or?
Thousands of years, right?
Oh, wow.
Thousands of years. We know that transness or Fa'afafine identities, third gender, as other people understand it, but within Pacifica cultures have just always existed.
Okay.
I think there's been kind of like a brainwashing, so to speak, as effects of imperialism and or be it religious indoctrination that has force-fed us this message that we're supposed to look and operate in this world as a certain type of way.
Okay.
And that's just not the case, right? Like you say this all the time on your podcast, is people are so much more complex than we know and realize. And when we think about ourselves and the ways we move in the world, right? We are so many different things, right? We are not limited to the clothes that we put on our back,
or the job we have,
or the job that we have, or the things that we do. We're a combination of all of those life experiences and the people that have come before us, right, to bring us to this moment in time that we get to share together. Now, what's happening in the social landscape is because transness is becoming this polarizing topic that people are starting to feel like they are questioning within themselves, maybe their own level of comfort of like, is this really how I'm supposed to be or exist? Or do I have to change in a certain way to address somebody else, to give them a level of respect? Like even pronouns is something people are still struggling to accept. When someone says, I'm non-binary and please address me as they, them. People are like, oh, wait, now I got to change how I move and operate in the world for your comfort and safety. But if we think about it, when we do that, as we do in everyday moments, that is a level of care, right? When I come to you and I say, hi, Nicole, my name is Donato. Will you address me as Donato or will you call me Susan? I'll be like, girl, where does Susan come from?
Right.
Like, that's
I call you by your name. I call you by your name. No,
and
that's
if
true.
I say along with my name that my pronouns are she, her, or they, them, Well, does it mean enough to you to remember that?
Yeah, you know what's so interesting about that? And this is being transparent. I don't know if I've ever told you this story before, but I didn't understand, the
Mm,
trans community for the longest time. Longest time meaning
mm,
until I was 12. So that's not really that long. I like to pretend my identity, being young. I'm like, oh, I'm a young girl, but I'm not,
mhm,
But I remember the moment where I came to understand the trans community, and it had a lot to do with pronouns. I
mm.
shared a lot of confusion around this third identity, but in a youthful way, I think, in a way. It never felt personalized. I just didn't understand. It was my
Yeah.
first introduction to it because I grew up in the 90s where, there was a lot of, I think a lot of friction. This generation, I think, is honestly being exposed to more because of social media, because of algorithm. They're just asking questions sooner than ever before. And
Yeah.
growing up, for me, when I was first exposed to anything trans, I was watching MTV True Life documentary. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with it, but they would follow people around, and they were following around a young trans woman. And I remember not understanding the whole episode, just kind of, because she wasn't feminine presenting, and at that age, 12, I just was
Yeah.
like, well, a girl looks like this and a boy looks like this because that's just what I've been told, and it was a moment where she was showering. And because this documentary was kind of gritty, they're filming her, but while protecting, her decency, if you will,
Yeah.
and she was using a washcloth to cover up herself, and she expressed
Mm,
that she really struggles. It actually makes me teary when I think about it now,
yeah.
that she feels like this part of her, her genitalia did not feel like it belonged on her. And she
Yeah.
described it as having an arm that, imagine if your arm felt like it was foreign, like you didn't understand what it was. And at 12,
Yeah.
I will never forget thinking to myself what you just said right now, which was, if all she wants is for me to say her name is Susan and
Mhm.
I should say she, like, and that makes her feel less like she wants to cut her arm off, or less like
Yeah.
this part of her doesn't belong, or less like she is far from herself,
Or feel seen,
feel seen,
period, at face
period.
value.
Right. Like just in terms of her, I could see undeniably that she was hurting,
Yeah.
in the way that she was in her body. And I didn't need to know why.
Yeah.
I just knew that if what she asked of me was that care, as you described it, that was something I could afford her without understanding anything else.
Mhm.
So at 12, without sort of exploring the world of trans, I was able to tap into my empathy enough to say, I can afford you this, which is what I think you're describing here.
Yes, yes,
You know?
1,000%, because then that helps us close the gap quicker,
So
right?
what's this gap? Where are we now, and where should we be?
Mhm. I think where we're at now is not enough people know a trans person directly or have a personal relationship with them.
Whose
And
fault is that? Do you know what I mean? Do you feel like the trans community, because people talk about not outing people,
yeah.
like, should the trans community be out? There was a
Mhm.
campaign, I think you're a historian also of, the work that you do. There was a campaign in the 90s, I think it was the 90s, early 90s, late 80s, where they were like, if you're gay, you should be out, because if
Mhm.
everybody knew
The
someone
no hate
gay.
campaign.
Correct,
Mhm.
correct. So is that what you're saying should happen? And is that not harmful, considering suicide rates and things like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. I think right now, what's interesting and what I'm experiencing too in real time as someone that works in media and,
Mhm.
and advocacy, is that visibility can be this kind of double-edged sword,
Mm.
right? In the sense of like, if I'm too visible, does it make certain spaces less safe for me? But then on the other hand, because of my visibility, people can have deeper conversations with those around their families or communities about what trans people look like, even, or
Mhm.
just we exist.
Right, yeah, just like it's even a thing.
What I want to encourage people to also think about is that as any people continue to navigate their own gender identities,
Mhm.
right? Like it can be ever evolving,
Mm.
right? The work that we do to like put so much pressure on ourselves
Mhm.
to be any type of way, it's just not true,
Why
right?
are
It
we
can be
like that?
fluid.
Like, why do you think we're so obsessed? This sounds wild, but, like,
Mhm.
why are we so obsessed with that, with our sex,
Yeah.
right? With our bodies, with our,
Mhm.
is that because our culture is rooted in relationship, or we need to know where we stand? Like, why? Because I really
My
don't care for
yeah.
the most part.
Yeah. I think here's my personal belief. I
Yeah.
feel like because we live in a patriarchal society, right? Oftentimes we're fixated on measuring people up to see what we can gain from them, whether
Mm.
that is sex or access or labor, right? What can you give me? And so I need to be able to read you and understand you from the jump to know what I can get from you. And that's harmful, right? Women don't really do that.
Yeah, no.
Like
Yeah,
we're just like,
no.
come as you are. I'm curious to learn about
Yeah.
who you are. Open up, learn about you. Great.
Yeah, just sit at a table and hang, and then we'll go from there. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I see what you're saying is that it helps us figure out our standing.
Yeah.
You know, it's just kind of where am I standing in relation to this person, and what can they offer me, depending on what it looks like.
That's ick.
Yeah, it is ick. I was like, that's kind of gross, but I get what you're saying. You know, I get what you're saying. And then, you know, you did talk a little bit about safety. So have you always presented, and please, I also want, you know, and I want everyone here to see this example as well. I hope you guys hear, I'm a little uncomfortable in this conversation because I feel challenged, you know, challenged to, you know, respect you and respect and create a safe space for you to share with not just me, but with, you know, everyone who's listening and be as, because, you know, it is something to be honest and vulnerable and know that, you know, you may not feel safe, which is what I want to go into. So I hope you guys hear me sort of fumbling and stumbling and knowing that you can do that too and still learn and figure it out and be corrected and like survive, right? You know?
Yeah.
So all that being said, you know, at what point have you always presented feminine, you know, or have you, because I know that growing up, that was something that was always identified. What was that like in your childhood? Was it readily understood? Did your parents, when you were born in your culture, did they even say, you know, it's a boy? That is such a huge part of our culture. Or did they say from the beginning, no, this is, you know, we have a daughter, you know? Could you tell me a little bit more about that if you're comfortable?
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yes, I know how you are, but you don't understand. I am like dancing because it's like I just want to make sure that you feel safe in sharing, because I think a lot of people who may be listening, you know, they don't know. I don't know. You know what I mean? And who gets an opportunity to sit with someone who's trans and say, when did this happen for you? When were you always a little boy? Or, you know, were you always a little girl? How did your parents respond to this? And then what was that journey? You know, so I would just love to know more from your experience.
1,000%. Yeah. So when the Donato Fatuesi was born,
yes, capital
the
D.
whole world stopped.
Yeah.
The end.
The end. Full story. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Yes.
For me, I've always led with such a feminine energy, right? Yes, I was assigned male at birth, but as soon as I was able to like start walking and, you know, demonstrating characteristics from a young age, like I tell people the hips were swinging.
Yes.
With no denial that is a feminine boy.
Right.
But the beautiful thing about growing up in a cultural society that has words to ascribe to me what I am.
You already had a gender.
We had a language,
Got
right?
it.
And so my aunts, my dad, my family were like, oh, if fingin le kamania, meaning this boy is trans, right? And so there was just this understanding that I would move through the world a certain way, right? And so I was very loved and in many ways affirmed in that and felt safe enough to be that, right? Despite other outside influences. Like, I'm not saying it was all easy.
Yeah, so that was what I was going to say was, you know, a lot of people say that some of their fear is, well, if we become a culture that accepts that there are third or additional, you know, gender identities, we're going to run off the rails, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so growing up in a culture where your parents were able to do that, one, do you feel like they made you into someone trans because they already put that label on you? I'm just asking because people are going to ask, right?
Yeah.
You know, or two, do you feel like your culture, how do you feel not safe there if it was something that was already part of your culture? Because if that's what we're trying to move towards here, you know, I'd love to hear what it's like growing up like that already.
Yeah, 100%. So for me, it was the strongest message to, I guess, combat my transness being demonstrated from a young age was that my parents and my family sat around me and was like, if that's the life that you're going to live, we need you to slow it down, right? And wait until after you graduate high school to be your full self.
Tell me more about that.
And so I internalized a lot of that as meaning I needed to be the best at school. I needed to be the best in everything, right? To then get closer and closer to presenting as I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of like my younger years, up until I was 11 or 12, I felt like I had to hide my femininity.
Oh, wow.
Right? I wore clothes that didn't feel comfortable. My body didn't fill in. My hair, I felt like I had to dim it down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, dim the Donato
Yeah,
lightness
but that's
down,
still
and
who you
that didn't
were.
feel good. It was always who I'd been.
Right.
But I had known, at least within the home and around my cousins, like I could be my free self.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
And what I started to learn as I became a teenager was that despite being the overachieving, high-performing student, that it was okay for me to then open up and be myself, right? And I found so much more closer relationships and respect amongst my peers because, and I felt it was because I was being like a top student or whatever. But like that in itself created like this whole other thing in my life. But I was okay with that. If that meant that it could help other people open up and feel more comfortable around trans people, that I was doing something good. Because I had other friends that were trans or fafafinge growing up in school that their families didn't accept them at home.
Even though in the culture that is already understood. So the parents would, so within your culture, because you talk about safety, within your culture, even though the fafafine gender identity is still recognized, acknowledged, and been in existence for so long, is it still seen kind of as an other? Or just kind of like in, America where, Black people have been here, since the beginning of America because we built it, So knowing that that's the case, we still are marginalized. Do you find that it's still seen as that, like a second-class citizen, or is there an integration because there are cultural roles? Like, how is that?
So it's an interesting dichotomy because on the one hand, yes, culturally accepted, but on the other hand, and I feel like a lot of folks listening might be able to relate to this, is because of the harm of religious indoctrination within Samoan society, that the friends that I grew up with at home, because their parents were very religious, they had certain values that made them feel that their child was an abomination because of their fafafine identity, which is harmful. But in my house, it looked different because we didn't practice those same values when it came to religion. And like what people often don't hear me say too is like, I was baptized and grew up Catholic. I'm still very spiritual and religious. Right. And like we exist, but my version of spirituality and religion does not
other. It doesn't exclude.
Yes. Yes. So like there's all of those unique things at play. And one pivotal moment I recognized when I needed to really just like F it all up.
Yeah. What was that point where you were like, I'm going all in? I am seeking change. I have to live my complete truth because, again, we'll circle back to safety. You know what I mean? Because this is something that I think is ongoing within. I always want people to, as they're learning more about the trans community, to measure against how important is it that we hold on to our ideals or refuse to be informed more about other ideals versus the safety of a people, right? So that said, what was the moment where you were like, okay, push or shove, I have to be all in because this is who I am, and you were going to live your truth completely.
I'm going to take you back to when I was 15 and I received a letter to join the National Honor Society at my school. I was also already socially transitioned, which as a kid just means being accepted for my pronouns, wearing the clothes that, I feel comfortable in, right?
What is the other transition? Just to help people understand, is that not all of the transitioning? Is it socially transition? Is there another type, like mentally transition? What are the...
Yeah, some people later in life, right, as an adult, I had undergone medical transitioning.
Oh, it's okay,
right?
social or
social
medical.
Transitioning is just like, okay, we will address you with your pronouns, your name if you so choose to change it. I chose to stay with my birth name because I'm named after my uncle who I love. And so I feel like even in keeping my name, I make people pause and think when they're like, Donato sounds masculine. I'm like, and?
Yeah, I don't, yeah, it's,
and?
yeah. It's a name. It's your name.
It's a name.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Plant.
Yeah.
It's like whatever, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I get it. So, okay. So socially transition versus medically transition, for those who are listening and wondering around terms,
Yeah.
you know, that's a respectful way to gain additional understanding around the journey that someone who may be stepping fully into their identity, you know, may be going on. So kids that we see that we may visually, based on our understanding of gender, see and recognize as male, should they be wearing a dress, which is something we identify as female socially, they could be going through their social transition.
Yes.
And so when we hear things like kids are being told to go through medical transition, that's actually something that happens later in life oftentimes.
Yes.
Okay. So what we're witnessing is actually a social transition that usually doesn't involve any medical transitioning.
Correct.
That's really helpful.
That's really helpful. And I think that is where a lot of the fear that people feel when thinking about trans people and like
what is happening.
What
just
is
not
happening.
understanding. So at 15, so you're 15 and you're just socially transitioned.
I'm
at this
15.
Point. Yeah.
I'm captain of the cheerleading squad. I'm joining the National Honor Society. I'm class president.
At this point, how do you feel?
I feel so loved and seen and affirmed, right? Like, but I couldn't have gotten to that place if at home, right, I wasn't held and seen and loved, right, and respected for that. Like, if anything, my mom had to sit me down and was like, those shorts and that skirt is getting a little bit too short. If you're going to live the life you want to live, stay respectful.
Yes. It's like, listen, mommy, you need to put some clothes on. Every mom can relate to that. No matter what, we want our kids out there covered. Okay. So yes, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so for me, by that point when I was 15, what had happened was there was this effort to get me out of the National Honor Society after I'd grown my hair back out. So in my interview, they made this a condition upon joining. And I had the longest interview amongst my 30 peers. And they grilled me hard on so many different topics and things. And I was fine. Handled it like...
Of course. Yeah, I mean,
like
you
Oprah
do.
Winfrey.
Yeah, always. You know how. Yeah.
And the end of it, what I realized what was happening, by the end of it, the vice principal said to me, will you agree to cutting all of your hair off? And then we will let you join the Honor Society.
Now, were there
my
no
hair was
other...
already down to here, girl.
Yeah, so
I was feeling cute and girly and all the things.
This is why, so I have to ask, you know, because people always say, well, was that a term for everyone? Did everyone have to cut their hair? Is short hair a requirement for National Honor Society kids? I mean...
Yeah. And so like... The young activist in me was like, this is BS.
I know what this is.
I know what this is.
Yeah.
But this means so much to my mom for me to join this honor society. So I'm going to make the sacrifice and do that. And then I'm going to organize to help change this and combat it. So within the next year, as a protest, I grew my hair back out. And they didn't have any other reason to kick me out again.
Yeah.
But your hair. And I was like, I need to sit down with the principal, talk about there's nothing in the bylaws or anything that say that I can't have my hair long. It's always been well maintained. I look good. You know, other people at home might also relate to like conversations about hair and whether what's professional, right? And so after navigating that and then becoming the only person to get a full ride scholarship for the Junior Statesmen of America program at Stanford University while I was 16.
Tell them.
Yes. I was like, okay, you know what? This is all BS. And then when I got to spend the summer at Stanford that year as a high schooler, and I learned like a lot of like the certain fears that people were putting on me as a young kid to dim my light, all of these other kids beyond Samoa embraced me for it.
So you actually felt safer here or better understood, or?
I was recognizing that the ways that people were trying to make me feel small or othered was just a way to like, I don't know, dim my shine.
Yeah.
But I was learning that the world is so much bigger than Samoa, and any of the fears that people had tried to put on me to like tone it down or be a certain way, because now I was meeting kids from all over the country, from a lot of different other backgrounds and cultural experiences. And I was like, okay, there's so much more then Samoa.
Yes, first of all, which I mean, you're literally explaining the
Mhm.
whole like small town girl moves to the big city, right? We all can
Yes.
kind of relate to that to
Mhm.
begin with, but then also being 16, you know, it really does open your eyes. Travel is so huge, which is like the point of these chats, right? Is
Yeah.
letting people have their eyes open to look. You don't have to go out tomorrow and paint your house rainbow. You don't have to
Mhm.
go out tomorrow and be like, I'm donating to every trans cause. But I hope that people at least hear this and they're like, okay, I can at least think of one person that I've spoken to, heard from, you know, that is trans and say, well, a lot of what she's saying sounds a lot like what I grew
Yeah.
up with. You know,
Yeah.
my parents kind of got me, but they kind of didn't, or my friends didn't get me. Or I think every woman listening to this knows the time that we've been in the office and had someone kind of take something we deserved or earned and then give some bullshit reason why they think that we shouldn't have it. And we look them right in the face like, I know exactly what this is. This has
Mhm.
to do with the fact that I look this way or my hair or whatever. This is not
Yeah.
about the work, right?
Mhm.
So that said, you know, the safety element of it. So it's already well known that, you know, well, I shouldn't assume, right? But in the trans community deals with absolutely absurdly high suicide rates. Also abuse, being attacked, being murdered.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, it is, and I only imagine what those rates are if everything was reported, right? It is
Mhm.
astronomical. Can you tell me a little bit more about your safety within that? Because you are a big bright light. You are
Mhm.
out loud. You are out there. Like, aren't you scared, you know? And what do you think that's all about?
Yeah.
It's a
Whew.
lot. That's loaded. I know,
Whew.
but I want to get
Yeah.
into it because I think people need to know that, you know, when people are saying, you know, as a trans person, I just want to feel safe. It's not just, I want to be able to wear my dress to school. It's
Yeah.
not that, you know,
Mhm.
it's, you don't understand, like people kill us,
Yes.
you know, and it's the same thing. I identify very much as a Black person who understands that Black lives matter. You know,
Yeah.
it's not just, I'm asking for something I don't deserve. It's that there's an actual attack on my life and I want to be safe. You know,
Mhm.
so tell me more about that and all of us, for those of
Yeah.
us who don't know.
Yeah. I think for me, my heart really hurts for other trans people who have either very limited resources
Mhm.
to either relocate if they need to because certain cities just don't have the either legal protections in place or affirming resources
Mhm.
and things of that nature, or don't come from families that are supportive,
Mhm.
right? So my heart really hurts for them. And I do my best to try to connect people to resources. And what that means and looks like is as we're even talking about the violence against trans women,
Mhm.
especially Black and brown trans women,
Mhm.
there's an amazing organization that I work with called Transformations, and they're a regional organization in the Midwest. And the reason why my heart was called to work with this specific organization is because, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Kansas City is one of the cities with where the epicenter of violence against Black and brown trans women occur. And many of those women are engaged in sex work, right? Either
Wow.
street based or
Kansas City,
online.
Missouri.
Kansas City, Missouri.
Now, I will say Kansas City, Missouri is, you know, known for being a very conservative state,
Hmm.
very religiously, you know, focused just as a state. You know, obviously it doesn't mean that anything's a monolith, you know, it's reflective of
Yeah.
many, but you're also saying that there is a fairly sizable trans community there, especially within the Black and brown
Hmm.
um, marginalized people, and they are experiencing violence at a rate that is higher than
Yes.
the rest of the US. Is there any reason why that is? Is it, I don't know.
Here's one thing that's interesting to unpack when you think about it
Mhm.
is between Kansas, Missouri,
Mhm.
and Arkansas.
Mhm.
Like this is a region where like the Mason-Dixon line runs
Yep.
through,
Very familiar.
right? So
Mhm.
like there's the history of racism, right, in that region, as well as the emergence of and visibility of trans people, which like I know there's so many women and sisters of mine that have worked in that hustle for like 40 years and have been mothering community and trying to keep them safe. But when you live in a state like Missouri or Kansas and Arkansas, where there is limited like economic or jobs that like or protections for trans people to have jobs, like it's
You got to
it makes
eat.
sense that people find work in underground economies to survive, right?
Let's just be clear, though. Sex work is no longer, and for those of you who tend to listen to our podcast with their kids or with their children, headphone warning. We'll throw that at the top of this if you didn't catch it the first time. But, but hopefully you have these conversations with your kids, because sex work isn't underground anymore.
Yeah.
OnlyFans is very public and it is very prominent. And during the pandemic, lots of people were out there. We're going to keep it all the way real with they feet pics. Okay. Talk about how can I get coins? Because they were finally feeling the pressures that I think some marginalized people, due to legislation, due to the world, due to whatever, have felt from the beginning. So suddenly, certain things became normalized that were never seen as being normal. They were just seen as a byproduct of your circumstances. But, if you put a different face on the same behavior, it can often be treated differently. So that being said, that's what you're saying these people are facing, is they're just opting for sex work because at the end of the day, they need to eat. And OnlyFans didn't exist 40 years ago. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there is that level, and then intimate partner violence, right? Sometimes when the threat of a cis man engaging with trans women becomes something that is known between their friends or whatever, or even feeling confronted with not knowing, right? Disclosure, conversations around. And what I mean by disclosure is like engaging in a romantic relationship with someone and whether or not they know I'm trans, right? People will sometimes have a panic.
Like an outsized response.
An outsized response to that, right?
To you disclosing you are trans.
Yes.
When they believed that visually you identified as a woman.
And this is kind of, I want to tie this back to the understanding that if somebody doesn't meet your expectation of what they could get from you, right? Then they get uncomfortable about that, or they feel threatened. And so sometimes that leads to violence.
I can understand that. And I hope everyone is kind of picking up what you're laying down here, because to put it into a different context, as a woman, I'm a woman of certain financial means. I've had men approach me, and they approach me with an understanding that they could either buy me out, like, oh, I'll get you handbags, or I'll get you a car. And I'm like, oh, honey, I'm the rich man in this conversation.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I was like, so very cute, but I'm not interested. And then I'll get called things like you're a bitch, or you ain't shit, or it'll get very aggressive towards me because I don't need anything from that person. They can't get what they thought they could get from me. So is that kind of what you're describing as the dynamic?
That's exactly what I'm describing.
Okay, got it,
right?
got it.
And then sometimes too, when people are, particularly cis men that engage with trans women.
And can you say what cis is, just for anyone who doesn't understand?
Yeah, so cis is a term in the dictionary that means like it's the opposite of trans, right?
Okay.
So for me, as someone that is trans, I identify as the opposite sex of what I was born with.
Yep.
Cis just means you identify, if you were assigned female or male and you identify as female or male,
that is
then
what
that's
you are.
cis.
Got it. So it's not an offensive term.
It's
no one
not
should feel
an
weird about
offensive
that.
term. There are some people that, have gotten loud on social media to say that they feel it's offensive. And even to that, I'll be like,
talk to Webster.
Talk to me.
the dictionary.
Why do you feel it's offensive to you?
Yeah,
right. But again, I'm of the spirit of like, if you tell me, person to person that calling you cis is offensive to you, then I won't call you cis.
Right. Because it's not that serious.
Yeah. I can respect you and move on.
Right.
What happens on the opposite is like, if a trans person is saying I'm trans or non-binary and you choose to ignore that, like, which often happens, is like,
well, then what was going on? You
What's
just asked
going
for
on?
this. No, I get that. So, okay. So, the violence between. So if someone is cisgendered and they are discovering that, either through sex work, because they may have paid for someone and known, right, that they are known that they are trans, or
not
known, or even in intimate partner relationships, there's this disclosure. Now, is that disclosure part, expected, or is that understood? I imagine that's got to be tough just in dating.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say it's got to be tough, especially, I find that difficult just around finances, and that's not even, so no one's beating me up because I have extra coins. You know what I mean? But it was difficult to have to, or being divorced or having kids, or, things that you think that the other person may not respond to. But when you also have the additional weight of, I could die behind this.
Mhm.
Like, I find myself being so emotional about it. You know, some of it's pregnancy hormones, everything's amplified, but you know, knowing you, it's scary for me. Like, I get scared for you in that context. What is that like walking around with that lived experience and that threat?
Mm. It's tough, but it's also like I've learned for myself, I'm no longer going to dim my light or my shine for anyone. And if you're on board, great. If you're not, goodbye. Right. And here's like just like a recent experience that I had is, well, actually, when I go out, I attract.
Yes, you do. Listen. Yes, you do. You walk into a room, main character. Okay, so yes.
And recently, I was approached by this man in a bar when I was with my family, playing pool, and he was enamored by me, wanted to get to know me. It was such a great, cute, meet cute moment.
Yes.
And he approached me and was like, "I'll play you and your cousin, and if I win, can I get your number?" I was like, super cute.
Super
great.
cute.
Later on, before furthering that engagement, I wanted to make sure that I disclosed.
Now,
just
is
for
that
me,
a
for my safe.
preference?
That is my preference to keep me safe. Some people operate differently. Do you, boo? For me, if I'm going to get even more involved with anyone, especially like sexually or anything, I want them to know first and foremost. So you can choose for yourself if you want to stay in this or not.
Right.
But you have to earn that. I'm not just out here going around being like, I'm trans.
Right. Well, I'm not going around being like, I'm straight.
Right.
Because I could be trans. People don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other part too, is I really don't think people realize half the people around, you don't even know. You know what I mean? But I do think, again, that makes people nervous, you know, and they feel like some additional, it's odd to me that disclosure is required. However, I appreciate for one's safety, you know, the respect, I guess, of saying, hey, we're putting this all on the table. Just like I wish men brought their credit reports to dates. Okay, let's just disclose. Okay, let's be honest about where we are. But that said, when you disclose, what is the response that you typically get?
More often than not, and this might surprise people, is that men that I've seen and dated are totally okay with that and are respectful of it.
Does it stay that way? Or do you find that down the line they change? Or just, I mean, and I say this as a woman who I will disclose my financial situation. Guys will say, we don't care. And then it'll be an issue later, you know, where it'll be like, she really can pay for everything. She will, where do I fit? Because they're having to figure out their own identity within this sort of new construct that doesn't fit society's norms, where I need a man to care for me. So do you run into that at all as a trans woman, where it's like, we were all good at the beginning of the disclosure, but now when we're going out, I'm feeling less than, or, you know, anything like that?
Well, and here's the interesting thing. I might disclose my transness to you, but did you disclose you have a wife?
Oop. Let's do all the disclosures. Okay, so there's that part, right?
You know, situations like that. So and sure, I may have had to navigate situations where you say up front you're cool with it, but then you're not cool with being seen with me out in public.
Or your family and friends. When it comes time for us, we've been together a whole year. And now it's like, oh, you're bringing me to the wedding, or we're going to whatever. And now we want to act funny. You know, which, let's just be clear. I think all women hearing this right now are like, okay, like we all relate to this. So is that where, do you work? I mean, because again, violence is always around the corner, potentially, you know, and more so for trans women. How does that feel for you?
It kind of sucks.
Girl, you're like, it sucks.
It sucks. Yes. Like, I'm single again right now.
I know. Not for long, though. I was like, because you still got to walk out of here. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. But it also has meant, like, in a sense, a constant triage of, like, experiences with dating, right? First and foremost, like, for me as a value is, right now, sex is not even on the table. If you're wanting to even interact with me or date me, we're starting from a place of friendship. We're literally getting to know each other, however long that takes, right? And I'm going to make sure that you are someone that I really want to build an intentional life with before we ever get to that place.
I'm like, talk to my daughters, please. The kids out here, the kids of these streets, they fast, okay? They fast.
Oh, and I've been fast.
Listen, I've been fast too,
for
okay?
so long.
I wasn't always saved. I've been fast too, okay? I've been there. I got a lot of kids. No, I get it. But it's also one of those things where I think this is also good for people to hear, because sometimes there is, again, the conflation, the mixture of sort of religious perspectives, you know, which for some, your religious perspectives are your value. For some, they inform your values, you know, and I think that a lot of people do associate, if this is your gender identity, you know, that there is also a sexual promiscuity or a
Yes.
sexual, which is why we touch on sex work as saying, look, this is a need-based, career, just like someone on OnlyFans or
Mhm.
these Instagram models,
Mhm.
they're trying to make money. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? Do you find in the community they're more promiscuous, or
Mm.
are you just 23 and in these streets like 23-year-olds,
Yeah, I think so. And the other part of that is that many queer people don't
Mhm.
actually get to have other experiences when it
Mhm.
comes to like dating and finding themselves
Mhm.
until they're like mid-20s and 30s, right? So
Girl, in
go
some
all out,
states,
y'all.
yeah, listen,
Right? Like,
girl, in
have
some
your
states
fun.
till their 40s, okay?
Mhm.
Because you will find there'll be some grown men who have gone through that marriage, gotten that divorce, and now they're living. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And you're like, oh, or they're living while married. We talked about that.
Mhm.
So there's that part. So no, that makes sense. I always like to make it clear that if you're queer, that does not mean that you have stepped outside of your vows. I go to a church that is a wonderful church. I absolutely love it. I love my pastor. And, it's not uncommon in our congregation to have queer couples, that are there practicing, serving the Lord, living a life and taking a walk with Jesus. And they are married, they are monogamous, they are, living as a family. And this is not me elevating, my construct of what a relationship
type
is,
of relationship
one type of relationship over another. But I
Mhm.
am saying that, it does exist. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes people we're just all very quick to create like a monolith, a single
Mhm.
style of living around something we may not understand. And I just love hearing that you are an amalgamation of things. You were like, I worked too hard as a 15-year-old. And then I was like, I'm not doing it. And then I moved to, I was like, oh, California's cool. And then I date, but it's hard. And now I'm single and I'm celibate. Like, I love like all this. Because I'm like, girl, like, yes, this is every kid, every person. We're all on our journey. So I have to ask you, since you've already shared so much with us, and I think you've really given everyone something to chew on. If there was one thing, right, like
Mhm.
one big ask, one change that you hope that people, if they're interested, would like to carry into the world, that might either make it a little better for you, or make it a little better for, people that that are like you, what would it be?
Mm. I think my big ask is going to be for each individual person listening. When was the last time that you took a moment to check in with yourself and your body and the way that you present to the world? What messages have you held on to for so long around how it is you're supposed to look, show up, and be? What are you no longer comfortable with? What can you let go of? How do you want to continue to evolve and grow past that? When you start there, maybe, just maybe, you can have a little bit more empathy towards trans people all across the world.
Wow. That is the assignment. Okay.
Mhm.
That is the assignment for everyone. And so, so good. Thank you so much for giving us a chance to learn more about you and hopefully more about ourselves.
That's the assignment. Thank you for having me, Nicole.
Thanks for being here.
I love you.